this is something I increasingly think about is to what degree do you need extremists on either side of the spectrum to serve as agitated propaganda who like then calibrate the Overton window? Meaning, like in our culture, you can walk around with a hammer and sickle on your head, no problem. You can, have a hammer and sickle in your background. Nobody cares. Not nobody cares, but there's no penalty socially, nearly to the degree of having like the swastika in the background. And, if we're looking at it objectively, let's say, we should treat both of those with at least similar levels of contempt, but we don't. And so and Jonathan Peugeot, I don't know how familiar you are with his work, but
A
he,
bit.
yeah, he kind of points out that, well, we have this lopsided mythological kind of view of things where, well, because we allow the far extremists of the communists to just be, walking around without shame, that allows the Overton window to move left kind of culturally. And because we've clamped down so dramatically on like swastikas and Hitler and far right fascism and Franco and all that, there isn't an equivalent like pull culturally on the right. The furthest thing right that's socially acceptable is Trump kind of MAGA stuff, which is still super pro-Israel and all that. And so there's an argument that you need degenerates who you find repulsive in order to balance out in order to balance out the kind of scales, right? Because if you just have all of the communists walking around, like maybe being in the center and being kind of like, oh, this is wrong is not enough. You need like the equivalent right-wing kind of like fuck the communists and, pro-Hitler type shit. If you're going to be pro-Stalin, be pro-Hitler as like a calibrating mechanism. Now that's a hypothesis. You could easily just say, no, that just makes everything more degenerate. And that was and probably still is my mentality. Although I'm open to like, no, maybe you do need the extremists on the right, especially because then it serves as something that you can juxtapose yourself against. It's like I'm anti-communist and I'm anti-Israel, but Nick Fuentes, to the degree that he's just straight up anti-Semitic and racist, which I don't think it's useful to call people that as a means of like convincing other people's, but fine if we're just speaking descriptively. Yes, I'm happy to say that, and I'm sure he says he doesn't even care about being called anti-Semitic and racist, so whatever. Like maybe you need people like that to juxtapose yourself against and bring the discussion to balance. What do you think of that philosophy of discourse? Let's say.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably some merit to that idea, but just for the argument's sake, I may, give like a counterpoint to this.
Hit me.
Remind me, you made a video once where you made like a metaphor with some tool of how the left and right works, how everything becomes more
Yes,
right
a
wing, left
ratchet,
wing.
the political
Yeah,
ratchet.
yeah. Can you explain what you meant by that once again, just to remind me and whoever's
Yeah,
watching?
yeah. Political ratchet. I mean, a ratchet is a tool where you turn. I think it's a lug nut of some kind. You turn it, that tightens it, but then you can pull it back. It doesn't tighten it, and then you turn
Right.
it, and it tightens it. And the ratchet effect is like the left makes an extreme demand. We want to have, this is what the conservatives say. We want to abolish marriage. We want, marriage to be abolished. And the conservatives say, no, but we'll give you gay marriage. And the left says, no, we want to make everyone transgender. No, but we'll just let adults be transgender. And this is the conservative argument that it's going too far. I would say that's just in some sense, that's the natural evolution of morality. Like like going away from slavery was a left wing move, because it
Yes.
challenged the status quo. So that was a good thing. So the Leviathan leans left. The arc of history leans in a progressive direction. That's generally okay, but the ratchet, you can ratchet too quickly, and then yeah, right. The conservatives don't push back equally; they just give concessions or something. Of course, the left has their version of, well, the right does this with like neoliberal economics, which is probably true, but
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a nice metaphor because in that metaphor, like the net movement is still left, even if there's like temporary setbacks. You go back, right to the right in certain times. It's still over time, over a long enough time period, the movement is towards the left, and it's kind of something you can observe in the history of Western civilization or Western countries, where, arguably going back to the Reformation, you could say the Reformation was already in a way a left-wing movement, where the left in the dominant countries, the countries that would then dominate. I mean, first it was Spain, which was Catholic, but then the next countries that would take the lead of being the most powerful countries would be like the England or the Netherlands, right? The Protestant countries, and it just continues in that vein. You've got the first revolutions and the French Revolution, the Glorious Revolution in England, the American Revolution. These were all kind of left wing for their time. Obviously,
Yep.
any given founding father would be a white supremacist, racist, whatever,
Yeah.
by today's standards. But he would be a left-wing revolutionary by their own time, by the standards of their own time. And so I think there's an idea by this kind of obscure author called Sir John Glubb, I think, and he's written like an essay on the cycles of civilization. There's a lot of authors like that. There's Spengler and Toynbee.
Sure.
But his essay is particularly interesting, and it's not long, so it's actually readable in a human lifespan. And he talks about how the age of intellect is kind of always part of a civilization. It starts off with the age of conquest, then the age of trade, then the age of affluence or wealth, and then you get to the age of intellect, and that's the last age before the age of decline and decadence. And so, in a way, being left wing is just an intellectual thing to be, right? Like the intellectual classes somehow seem to have a natural tendency of being left wing, because they are capable of looking and analyzing the society they are in and kind of dissecting it, and based on that advocating, or like recognizing its injustices, its historical kind of messiness, irrationality, and then advocating for a rational reorganization of society. I mean, that's basically what the French Revolution was. If you look at the most extreme excesses of it, you had people introducing a 10-day week and renaming all the months to scientific names, and everything was just restructured. They reversed it after the Restoration, after the revolution failed in that respect. But there was people that wanted to replace all of the churches and have them worship the supreme being of reason and stuff like that.
Really?
Yeah.
That's so interesting. It's like the new man theory that is across all of, like Maoism and the Soviet Union and all that. Of like, we're going to erase history and build something anew using reason, and having kind of the blank slate mentality.
Yeah, and the argument I want to make is basically that there is like the left, or the intellectual left, especially the American intellectual left. It actually they're not actually Stalinists. They actually originated from a split with Stalinism. That's like where the tankies originated, right? It's like,
because they're the Trotskyites, right?
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, that's part of it, but I mean, like, there was this big kind of, you could say, split when Stalin invaded. I think it was Hungary in the 50s, and it split the left, because some people said that was necessary, that was based or whatever, and some people said that's imperialist in its own way, and Stalin is actually a reactionary, and he's actually in a way a red fascist, right? And so if you look at people that openly embrace Stalin now, it'd be like very niche. It's like infrared.
Mm-hmm.
The MAGA communists.
Haas reacted to one of my one of my videos like pretty positively. He was like, "This guy's a libtard, but man, this is true. What he's saying here is true."
That's an honor. Well, yeah, I mean, he's definitely interesting to listen to. I mean,
yes.
I do like people that bring together such contradictory, you know, like MAGA communism, and
Yep.
then like explain in their way how they bring it together. And like when they explain it in their way, it kind of makes sense. It's fun. I do like listening to this kind of stuff. But um, yeah, so but he's not really the mainstream of the left. He's pretty ostracized from the left. There is
Yeah,
no
for
real
sure.
openly Stalinist left. They don't embrace Stalin, like not even as a joke, like Nick Fuentes would embrace Hitler or something like that. So I would say the right wing actually is, you know, as a reactionary thing, kind of not necessarily anti-intellectual, but it has more anti-intellectualism to it than the left.
Sure.
And I think the threats that Nick poses and people like him pose is actually that he isn't the typical right winger. He isn't a hobbit right winger. He isn't a I just want low taxes and barbecue right winger. You know, he actually is an intellectual right winger. He actually in a weird way, and I know it sounds weird, he is actually a progressive in some way. You know.
Because he has like a comprehensive ideology that, you know, informs his views. That it's not just stick to status quo conservatism.
Yeah, and he has like a long term. I think he has like a long term kind of idea of forming a
Oh,
movement,
sure. Yeah, yeah.
and a politically charged and active movement, kind of like the left, which the right doesn't really have. Like it's like you don't really rally people into a movement based on opposing
Conservative. Yeah.
transgender toilets or something like that.
Right. Let me ask you, because you said that Nick Fuentes, as a joke, embraces Hitler. This is something that I don't. I go back and forth with. I go back and forth on, which is to what degree is Nick Fuentes, certainly some of his fans. I mean, I've seen comments from them. There's a comment that I cite now in all my that I'm going to cite anytime I talk about Nick Fuentes that basically says it's the number one comment on his Rumble video, one of his Rumble videos, and it says we should treat Jewish children the way Israelis treat Palestinian children, and that to me is like the concrete evidence of Nick Fuentes fosters degeneracy and yeah, racism and Jew hatred. Fine, I prefer the term degeneracy, but there's no disputing that, and that's a problem. On the other hand, it's not obvious to me whether or not Nick Fuentes actually loves Hitler and like likes Hitler and wants to advocate for that worldview any more so than a lot of left-wing progressives actually want to kill billionaires and put them on the guillotine and all that. It's like, are there leftists that want that? Yeah, for sure. Are there Nick Fuentes gripers that want that? Yeah, for sure. But with Fuentes in particular, and maybe Hassan is the equivalent, it's like, are they actually trying to get to a point where, you know, they're committing violence against their target group? I don't know. I'm certainly open to the I'm certainly, you know, people have a shadow side and, you know, a pro-social side. And so it's certainly within him. But what do you think of, to what degree is Nick Fuentes memeing? And like, that's why he's bringing up all the Hitler stuff. Sort of like Kanye West, Hail Hitler. Like how much of Kanye is like a committed, and what would it mean to be like ideologically committed, given that it's so obvious that Hitler's ideology is anti-Kanye West because he's black? So yeah, well, I don't know. How do you think about all of that?
Yeah, I find this is a very difficult thing to answer because you know you don't really it's hard to assess someone psychologically like
Yeah.
that. And on the other hand as well, the problem with kind of fascism and nationalism and whatever the like National Socialism and all these things is that they were very particular philosophies and very particular political ideologies that were in many ways very, very custom tailored to their time and place, which is not the case with kind of liberalism or communism. Liberalism and communism were like from their inception kind of designed to be an evangelized ideology, one size fits all for all of humanity in every nation on earth. But with the kind of various forms of what you can characterize as fascism or reactionary regimes or Nazism, they were kind of in many ways very kind of custom tailored to that nation. So it's like it's not very easy to kind of neatly separate capitalized Nazism and small n Nazism, and say what was like specific to Germany in the 1930s and the Weimar Republic, and what is some kind of general philosophy that people can adhere to, because to the extent that there are Nazis today, you could almost entirely characterize them as like LARPers, as like
A
people
lot of
that,
them. Yeah.
yeah, that just kind of wear costumes.
But Nick Fuentes,
Mentally,
people say Nick Fuentes is a neo-Nazi. And
yeah,
he definitely, like, who would you rather have run the country, a woman or a Hitler? Hitler, and it's like that's meta ironic because he does do Hitler apologia. But again, it's like, like even like there's one clip of him talking about, well, maybe Hitler, maybe history. Oh, well, first off, I absolutely 100% agree that Hitler is made to be the central villain of history. When I think there's a reason for that. He's a great candidate for the worst person of all time. But the overemphasis on Hitler means the underemphasis on Stalin, Mao, Imperial Japan, and we have a warped view of morality because that's our ultimate devil. This is like a central point of Jonathan Peugeot's work, that because Hitler is the ultimate evil, we've calibrated our morality such that we're not as good as calling out left-wing evil where it rears its head. Like the idea of a new man,
yeah.
like that should carry a lot of transhumanism should be more, morally detestable than it is because of, its roots in just, well, we're liberated from all the past history. It's, all that type of stuff. But I don't know where I was going with that. I don't know. Do you have thoughts immediately on that?
Yeah, specifically on Nick, I guess if you went with if you tried to find like an abstract small f fascism that just kind of tries to characterize a like abstract notion of what fascism is that isn't tied to any specific historical version of it, then you could I would say you can say that Nick falls under that, and I think he even referred to himself as a fascist before. I'm not sure. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but and you can, the thing is, it's like everyone has a different standard when it comes to this. I know that this guy Vosh you debated once, he has like this list by Umberto Eco he refers to.
Yeah, Umberto
There's
Eco's
like
14 points.
14 points, that's it. Yeah, 14 points. And like, that's one way of doing it, but they can also be interpreted very vaguely and applied very broadly. And to a certain sense, any kind of nation state with independent security policy is kind of militaristic and has a kind of cult of a presidency, and has like, a lot of states will fulfill it in a broad sense. But when it comes to like capital F fascism or capital N National Socialism, I think a lot of it is kind of meme magic. A lot of it is like breaking the overtone window. It's pretty, I think you're spot on. I think it's pretty much what you're saying. It's like, we have this villain, they want to change the playing field, break with that stigma. And that's the main reason, I think, in terms of really being that much inspired by all of the details of the political philosophy of Hitler and the Nazis. I think that's not really the case with Nick. I think I think he's way more focused on this and on the whole Catholicism thing, for example. He's way too American as well. Like there wasn't much focus on Catholicism. The Catholic Party was a big opposition against the Nazis. There wasn't really that. Yeah, I think Americanism has its own kind of flavor as well. It's very different from Germany.
Sure. Well, the obvious through line, the most important one, is the anti-Semitism, right? The reason he's like pro Hitler, or to the degree that he is, and like doing the Hitler apologia and memes and all that, is because he really does have I would say, a very warped and degenerate is my favorite go-to word, view of like Jews and the degree to which, again, he said Dave Smith is a Jewish psyop, which to me speaks of a level of demented conspiracy thinking that is very, very bad, and that is underlies then his more like, yeah, we've got to deal with the Jews, and all that. It's like, and again, the reason it's not just immediate condemnation is because there are valid critiques to make of Israel, and particularly the American relationship with Israel, and particularly like the Jewish American relationship to Israel that many people have. Right? Ben Shapiro has dual loyalty. That's just a fact. He says the single biggest guarantor of my loyalty to the United States is the existence of the state of Israel. It's like that's the definition of dual loyalty. So in some sense, I think it's important that someone is out there, again, breaking the taboo around pointing that out, because we actually need to get to that taboo is covering a real issue, which is like the American relationship with Israel is weird. And it's used by the Trump administration to freaking deport people and clamp down on free speech. And it's sort of like I was going to write a Substack piece on this, of just like, what's the Orwell line? It's like, if the state can get you to say 2 + 2 = 5, then they can get you to say anything. And as soon as you can say 2 + 2 = 4, then all else follows. It's like, if you can't say, yes, the American relationship with Israel is deeply problematic, and there are many Jews in America who have a sort of religious loyalty to Israel, that their religion compels, and there are many Christian Zionists too as well. But it is like that's if you can't say those things, then you can't speak honestly. What else can't you speak honestly about? And so Nick Fuentes is fulfilling that role. That's from a strict a cynical kind of utilitarian perspective. But he does foster, real like the comment that I brought up. And so I guess how do you balance that out? Why aren't you just completely condemnatory and all that, given he does say things that are deranged and certainly inspires it in his audience?
Well, I mean, first of all, I'm not really condemnatory of anyone, so like I'm not
that's
so,
yeah to be fair, that's probably
but
my underlying motivation. Fuck
find someone to condemn. But I think there's two things at play here. I think one thing is the whole containment issue, the whole thing that a lot of people are now saying the things he got banned for many years ago is gotten in a way mainstream. It's gotten in a way more kooky and more like prevalent everywhere and popular to talk about these things. But he's kind of still kept to a certain degree in containment. And, I can see how a certain personality type could maybe, become paranoid about these things and be like, okay, they're kind of building a limited hangout, gatekeeping kind of fake discourse here because I'm not invited. And especially like commentators that have a big following, I have the feeling they're all to a certain extent just narcissists, or like just kind of they're used to the fact that they're the most interesting person and have the most interesting things to say and the most intelligent things to say and whatever, and everyone around them doesn't. And whoever is on the same kind of popularity level is either tolerated or they're like an enemy anyways, and they're wrong about everything or whatever. So it's like it feeds a certain kind of narcissism. And I do appreciate the fact that you seem to be someone that is aware of that, and it's like you almost seem to foster like a hostile audience or something like that at times.
One might say, wait till the comments on this video show up. You need a well, in order to do this at all, you need a degree of narcissism. I mean, narcissism is so overused as a term, but like, you need that sort of blind self-confidence in a lot of ways as a shield of all the shit you get too. But I mean, like a narcissist, if a narcissist that's kind of was the first or like one of the first to speak about a certain topic, and then everyone else does it and still excludes them, that's like the perfect mix to like start getting paranoid and say that it's all like a fake discourse, because any real discourse would involve me. Right.
It's just, just to analyze it. But the other question I think that is more interesting is, what is the right angle to address the issue you just mentioned? Because the Hassan, for example, and Nick, they're two very different people, and they don't like each other, and they're very opposed to each other, but they're both very, very critical of Israel. They're kind of, you could almost say on the same page on that one issue or something, but it's for a very different reason, from a very different angle in each case, right? And so you have this. I mean, I don't want to simplify it too much, but like you have this post-colonial struggle. A white settler colony. Israel is a white settler colony. It's apartheid. All this kind of angle on the left, and then you obviously have the to a certain extent classic anti-Semitic angle from Nick's side. Excuse me. And the thing is, I don't know if any of them have the right angle. It's hard to tell, because you mentioned there's Christian Zionists as well. If you think about it, there's probably way more Christian Zionists than there are Jewish Zionists.
100%, yes, for sure.
And a lot of them are very influential, and it's like, to what extent is it maybe them being the bigger picture, or the more important thing to focus on? For example, even the late leader of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, he was in an interview once, and he was there to explain the American system, right? And he explains it with like, he does say it's Christian Zionism. He doesn't even mention the Jews in it. He says Christian Zionism, and then two other things, I think something like the military complex and oil lobby or something like that. But like he mentions the Christian Zionists in the thing. And it's interesting because like even the leader of the Houthis had a book by Noam Chomsky in his library and stuff. Like a lot of their ideologies are like these weird kind of melange, these mixes with leftist anti-colonialist ideologies. Same with this, do you know this professor, this Chinese guy, Professor Jung or something like that?
I keep hearing about this guy. I keep seeing clips. I saw one clip, I think it was of Destiny watching his video, and Destiny was like, this is interesting. And then the professor just says, now the Holocaust, just to be clear, there's no evidence of the Holocaust. He just says it like matter-of-factly. And it was like, really? And he goes, and I was like, okay, well, this guy's interesting. I don't know what to make of him though, but I keep seeing clips, and I've heard people mention him.
I haven't seen that one, to be sure, but I saw another one where he spoke about Israel as well, and then he made it all he tied it all back. I didn't find it super plausible, but he tied it all back to this kind of Christian Zionism.
Oh yeah, with like the messianic activism and ushering in the apocalypse and all that.
Yeah, and you can trace it back like pretty far in the US until like the Puritans and John Winthrop and all of these fundamentalists. They all had this kind of weird like esoteric spiritual belief in the New Jerusalem and all that. And you get stuff like the Mormons. You guys have like wild stuff out there.
Yeah, I'm aware. Well, and that's why the distinction between Zionist and Jew is important. And it's one of the reasons I'm okay saying Zog. People say, it's anti-Semitic, talk about Zog and all that. It's like, it's Zionist-occupied government. If it was Jewish-occupied government, I would agree. That not only would that be anti-Semitic, it'd be false, because like Ted Cruz is not Jewish, but he's an ardent Zionist. And arguably, one of the, if you are not happy with the Israel-U.S. relationship, I think one of the most productive things you can do, I mean, speaking broadly, is create the space for left-wing Jews to be able to freely criticize Israel. It's like
which they do, to be fair.
Totally, yes, right. But if you're on the right and you're constantly about the Jews, well then a lot of Jewish people are going to go, damn, like I don't like Israel, but everyone here is saying the same shit that was said prior to all the fucking pogroms and the fucking places where the worst genocides have occurred and all that. And I do think that needs to be clamped down. The flip side of that is, because Judaism is a race and a religion, and the religion is based on the race, you do need to talk about like, well, okay, the like the God's chosen people idea. Is that a Zionist idea? It's like, no, that's a Jewish idea. It is used by Zionism and appropriated in a way that is bad and Jewish supremacist in the case of the settlers. But you can have, perfectly reasonable interpretations of chosen people and all that. So it's not so there. I agree. It should be Zionist and not Jew. That like is the term that is the central issue here. But you also can't ignore the discussion about the aspects of like Judaism that flow directly into Zionism and Jewish supremacy. And I don't know. What do you think of that?
Yeah, it's a very contradictory topic, so it's very hard to pierce it sometimes, because even people like that go deep and want to trace all of this influence back into history, what they often leave out is that the Jewish community also has a long history of like mass apostasy. Just like I think there was this prophet Sabbatai Zevi, the Sabbateans in the 17th century, where I think at once they're guessing around half of the Jews just converted to his sect, and then he was pissing off the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, and so he out of personal safety just converted to Islam, and his followers converted to Islam, and that was that. They've just kind of lost, many of them, their trace has just been lost in history. They just converted to Islam, and just adapted to the local dominant religion of where they lived. And there's a lot of examples of that. There's just a lot of assimilation that always happened, especially among them, because they tended to be among the educated classes, and they tended to have way more secularists and atheists among them. So even today, there's among their community, it's one of the most secular communities, and so it's just this contradictory aspect. I mean, you can find a public letter by Hannah Arendt and Albert Einstein denouncing Israel as a terrorist state in like 1948 or something like that, or 49 or something like that.
Menachem Begin, who was a terrorist by any normal person's definition, I think it wasn't his. I forget the organization he was leader of, but they're the ones that did the King David Hotel bombing.
You mean the Irgun?
Irgun, yeah. And Menachem Begin then was second prime minister after Ben Gurion, right? Or president or prime minister? One of the two.
I don't think he was the second one. I think he came in later. I think he was like the sixth or something, think in the 70s.
But I believe in Einstein's letter, they call out Begin specifically, or at least the Irgun. I could be wrong. I'd have to go back and check. But
I think you're right. Yeah, there was another one, Abraham Stern. He was running what they called colloquially the Stern Gang, but they called themselves Lehi.
Candace Owens and Charlie Kirk. She released these texts that were confirmed to be real texts by other people in the group chat that said, Charlie lost like another Jewish donor. This is going to force me to leave the pro-Israel cause or something like that. I don't believe Israel killed Charlie Kirk, but I'm not so quick to, again, condemn, going back to condemnation, the people who are like exploring this, because it is odd. And Candace is quite the kook in many ways, but she did provide receipts on this one that I thought was interesting.
But is it enough?
Just say no. Of course not to prove that Israel killed Charlie Kirk. But that's not even. I mean, obviously that would, if they did, that would obviously be very significant. But I think the more interesting thing is the degree to which Charlie Kirk was changing his mind on Israel, or at least moving away from the pro-Israel cause, because I think Nick Fuentes' effect on the TPUSA movement and like young conservatives is just to so clearly turn them against Israel that Charlie had to respond. And I don't know enough about Charlie Kirk. I would not be surprised if he was the type of person, for cynical reasons or otherwise, forget out of principle, but who felt a greater sense of allegiance to his fans in TPUSA than he does his donors. I could very well see that being the case, and so he would want to align more with the people who are anti-Israel at the angst of his donors.
Well, especially because he's young, or he was young, um, and like his viewers were young, so they were kind of the future of his organization, right? It's like, who do you want to piss off? Like the old, the like boomer donors, or basically the young donors, or the young potential future donors? It does make sense for a youth
Sure,
organization
yeah, I see what you're saying from like a strategic point of view. Yeah. But what are your overall thoughts on Candace Owens? Because she's something else. Did you see the conversation between Nick and Candace by any chance?
Oh yeah, I think, yeah, I
It was
kind of
interesting.
listened to it passively, but I did get some of it. It was very uncomfortable. It was awkward. It was almost like sitting in a room with two friends of yours that don't get along, or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
It's
I don't. There's something. When you talk about like the narcissist, like she's the example of, to the degree that narcissism can be defined, she would be a narcissist in terms of just like, she made some comment to Nick at the end about not having a wife or not having a family, which is like, it's a valid line of inquiry to be like, who are you to be fucking telling all these people how to live their life and have families when you yourself are not doing the most important injunction in the Bible, go forth and multiply, and all that. Whatever, we can debate about whether that's the most important one, but that's certainly, it's important to get married and have kids in Christianity,
yes.
especially Catholicism. And he like responded, and then she was like, "Whoa, sorry you got mad. Like, whoa, you got so triggered right there." And it was just a very odd response by her. And I don't know. She's definitely a narcissistic grifter. But again, this goes back to my earlier point about, you kind of need those people, right? You kind of need those people on either side to be willing to just break all taboos, so as to stop taboos from being used to silence conversation around real problems. It's sort of like, the analogy I make is, there's an evolutionary reason for psychopaths, or this is one hypothesis, is, well, why would evolution create psychopaths? Because when we lived in tribes and you went to war with another tribe, you need a few psychopaths. Those are your elite warriors, right? Those are the guys who are going to go in and kill the enemy.
Right.
They're bad, obviously, when you're not in times of war, but there's like a balance. That's why it hovers around like 4 or 5%. That's the optimal, number of psychopaths in a population that, they're not dragging down the rest of the group with their psychopathy too much, and they're providing enough value in places where it's needed. And in some sense, narcissism can be thought of that, where like, if something is, like something's going wrong at your workplace, forget politics ideologically, like, there's some new rule that everyone hates. You want the person who just doesn't give a fuck what anyone's opinion is to be like, yo, this is bullshit. And like, you might not even like that person, but you're like, I'm glad he stood up and said something in the office. And on a heightened abstract scale, I kind of view a lot of these like personalities like that. I mean, even like, again, with Hassan, people who I don't like, and I don't like Candace in a lot of ways. But she provided receipts on this one, and that was interesting. Of course, the Bridget McCrone stuff seems to be going out the fucking window. She said she would stake her entire professional reputation that Bridget McCrone's a man. And I actually listened to Nick talk about it, and he laid out like the different lawsuits that got dismissed and all that. And I'm like, okay, yeah, this doesn't seem to be going very well for Candace. But anyway, what are your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned that earlier. It's like, I have a problem with people getting their education from entertainers. It's a format. It's an entertainment format that's there to kind of roughly inform you about things, but not really. It's not much different from like tablet press stuff, in my opinion. It's like, I feel like the stuff that she goes with, but not just her, a lot of people, is a lot of kind of gossipy stuff just in politics, and it's just going and getting some kind of rumor and running with it. That's what the Brigitte Macron stuff felt like.
Gossip.
Yeah, it just felt like gossip, and yeah, I just worry about a lot of people kind of seeing it as a substitute for actually educating yourself on topics, just kind of like listening to random
Yeah.
pundits, whether it's left or right. But I do think the right has more of a problem in that respect. Maybe I'm wrong, but like the thing is, the left kind of has these establishment media outlets, and with all of their faults, a lot of them still have professionally trained journalists working there. You know, a lot of them still have people that have like learned somewhere to do how to do their research and how to. Doesn't mean they're right. I have a lot of critiques of, you know, what they call the mainstream media, whatever. But like that's entirely out the window when it comes to right-wing pundits oftentimes.
Yeah. I would push back a little bit on the entertainment thing, because infotainment, you know, information entertainment, kind of has a negative connotation. When done right, I think it's the ideal way to consume information, right? Like it's aesthetics. Okay, first off, what I mean by, like, for example,
Peterson's lectures.
Well, Peterson's lectures, I wouldn't call that infotainment. He's very good. I mean, I guess he's very good rhetorically and, you know, in terms of communicating information. So that's just good. But like, you know, there's someone named CJ the X. I don't know if you're familiar, but he does videos that are very like fast paced and like bringing a lot of clips and memes. But they're philosophically dense, and they're some of the best way to consume.
Oh yeah, you've done videos.
I've had a conversation. I've had a couple conversations with him. Okay. And that's like I view that as the archetype of like, this is positive infotainment. I agree, the lowbrow, gossipy streamer bullshit. That's the entertainment kind of stuff that you're talking about, that I agree with is garbage. But even like, you know, a sophisticated work of fiction, like the Bible, not to trigger any of my Christians watching. You know, it's like, that's fictional but has real value to it. So I guess I think it can be done well, because I don't stream as much anymore, because I just feel so cancerous and pathological when I do it. It's just like, I'm just a performing monkey, and this is not good for me. More so, I don't care about other people's opinions. But I think it can be done well, and again, there's a role for it. Like, Destiny serves a very useful purpose, which is keeping conservative people in check. And that, like,
and occupied.
What do you say?
And occupied.
And occupy.
Occupied by like, you know, getting angry at him. Or
sure. Yes.
Just keeping them busy.
Yes, correct. But like, if like, for example, the example I always point to is the Twitter files. This was like a couple years ago when Elon bought Twitter, and then the journalists like Michael Schellenberger released all this stuff. It's like the Twitter files. The Twitter file, it proves like censorship of the right. Well, Destiny had a debate with the journalists, and he sniffed out all of the flaws in their arguments that were pretty good. Like, yeah, it actually, no, the Republican administration was censoring a lot of people on the left. And like, so in some sense, even though Destiny is a rabid dog in many ways, his scent is calibrated to sniff out any conservative weakness. So I can trust him to do a better job than anyone to go find the areas where the conservatives are wrong on. And so he's useful in that regard. You know, even though he has all kinds of problems in his own personality and personal life, and what he says just, you know, outright. And I just view, again, going back to that, I'm not in a condemnatory, you know, perspective. People got mad at me for talking to Destiny, like the last time I did, because he's got ongoing cases. And all. I'm like, I care about the effect.
Why did they get
discussion.
mad at you?
Because he has ongoing like civil lawsuits and cases about his personal life, and it was like, you're tacitly endorsing this. I'm like, this is just, it's the same. I turn my brain off to the same degree when people criticize me for saying anything positive about Nick Fuentes or Hassan, for that matter. Not that I do it that often, but
okay. Oh, like they were just accusing you of doing anything for the engagement.
Yeah, like, is it worth the engagement you get by and normalizing his behavior or whatever? It's like, okay, this is just
okay.
But anyway, so that's all the role of pathological personalities. It goes back to the very thing I brought you up in the beginning of like, in some sense, you need some of these people. You need these people. Some of the time, like you let the war dogs out in the middle of a battle, but then you gotta wrangle them up. Otherwise, they're gonna go kill the children in your own village.
Yeah, I wonder if it's possible to kind of find a new format though. I feel like there's so much saturation with the stuff that exists, but I always feel like there's something, it's like not really satisfactory. There's something missing because like you either have debates that don't really convince anyone. It's like you have fan clubs of like every time I see an online debate or something like that, and it's uploaded to both people's channels, then like on their respective channels, their people are going to support them
Of
in
course.
their comment section and say that they destroy the other person and whatnot. And otherwise, like there's either this kind of debate format or there's a kind of just like the echo chamber, talk to your own fan base kind of format, which is common with like Hassan and stuff
Yeah,
like that.
I will
So like
say.
I wish there was like a format that was kind of in between that where you actually got somewhere, where the exchange between across bubbles actually made some progress, actually went
I,
anywhere.
I don't think it's the format necessarily that's the problem. I think it's the individuals who participate in it. Although the format attracts a certain type of individual, so you're more likely to get the kind of individuals where it's not productive. My first conversation with Destiny I thought was pretty productive, and according to the comments on his end and my end, they were generally positive. They progressively got worse the more I talked about Zog, but over the next few conversations. But I don't know. I'd be careful to over-index like comments. I'm speaking as someone who has a YouTube channel and has learned to put less emphasis on comments and whatnot, because
Yeah.
the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. And so like people who don't like what you have to say, like will not listen to you, rather than come out and kind of bitch at you or whatnot. Although, and obviously, the people who don't like you will do that too to get a rise out of you. But like if a video gets 100,000 views and there's 1,000 comments and 500 of them are negative, you don't necessarily know what the other 999,000 people are thinking and the degree to which it influences them. And they don't even necessarily know the degree to which it influences them. It's like you watch enough. It's even just basic rhetoric of like Trump saying, well, everybody says this, everybody said, like Trump can just hyperstition things into reality by just, saying it over and over again. And a lot of people can do that. I'm not saying that's necessarily a good thing, but that if you recognize that mechanism exists, you can also acknowledge that even like a debate between a Nick Fuentes and a Destiny or whatever, whoever the people are, don't discount that in the span of like an hour conversation, there might be 5 or 10 minutes of like, oh, this is, even if the person watching it isn't consciously aware of it, because I've just noticed it myself, I'm just like, oh yeah, that, whatever, that's something that was brought up, or I do kind of sympathize with that, or even just when you see people of different political spectrums converging on the same point, like about capitalism or liberalism or techno-feudalism, you're not like consciously registering like, oh, this person is using the same term as this other person, therefore it must be true. But unconsciously, you're kind of getting the message of like, well, the fact that all these different people are converging on it who have so ideologically opposed interests indicates there's something true there. So I don't know. I think there is a lot of gossip and bullshit, yes, that is negative. But I don't know. I suppose I have an optimistic view of like intelligent people who are hunting down this kind of conversation are absorbing something generally, sometimes positive. I don't know. But I'm open to being convinced otherwise.
This is a perfect segue. You mentioned earlier that you wanted to get into fourth political theory and things like that. So
Yeah,
maybe
right.
maybe
Yeah,
it's neither the right nor the
nor the
left.
left. Yes.
Maybe it's not liberalism or fascism or communism. Maybe it's something else
Yes.
that is about to come up to emerge from this chaos, from
Yes.
this chaotic turmoil of various ideologies online.
Yes. We're coming up on an hour. Let's spend the last 15, 20 minutes or so digging into this. I have a book club that I
Okay.
started getting after I got bullied into it by my Patreon Discord members. And we're reading Why Liberalism Failed by Patrick Deneen. And I've only read the introduction. I have not read the first chapter yet. But I'm increasingly sympathetic to the post-liberal thinkers in terms of liberalism, the belief in negative freedom, that the only freedom that matters is freedom from coercion and interference. That's more important than human flourishing and positive freedom to pursue meaning and whatnot, something that's more defined rather than just free from all these different things. That's an opposition to liberalism, and I am sympathetic to that. Social norms being just basically the central problem of liberalism is that its emphasis of freedom makes you free from everything. Free from social norms, free from the nation state, free from your obligations, free from any sense of identity that isn't just whatever yours is. And I do think that's a problem. And I think it manifests in modern politics. Like the obvious example is like, well, transgender ideology. Gender identity is you're free from the biological categories of sex and all that. You're free from the nation state. We have open borders. We should have just one world. Cultures can just intermix and stuff. There's no such thing as collective unity. And I don't even mean racial. I mean like even just as like a mimetic identity. A tribe, whether it be like a church. I mean, a church is very explicitly not racial, and yet that's a collective identity. Christianity or whatever religion. And so I'm very sympathetic to that strain of thinking, and I do think a lot of our problems can be described as liberal or neoliberal malaise. Neoliberal tends to mean more the economic side of liberalism, and then liberalism, the underlying kind of assumptions. And I'm thinking about just real quick, I'm thinking about making a lengthy video essay called something to the effect of like the Jordan Peterson that could have been. And about how, and it's really just, it'd be like a reflection of how the philosophies that I've adopted from him, the natural conclusion of this is in the post-liberal realm. And there's many instances of him talking about, because the whole thing is he's a meme of like, the individual is the salvation of the collective. People are, well, he's the hyper-individualist. It's like, yeah, but actually, no, a lot of what he says is deeply rooted in the collective, and his critiques of Jung are that he was over-focused on the individual, and even Protestantism. He said it at one point, like he focuses too much on the individual. So anyway, what is your assessment of that and your understanding of post-liberalism and where you might sympathize and where you might disagree?
I think the point where I'm sympathetic is I think we actually lack any coherent political framework for the modern era or our current era. We that could sufficiently deal with the problems we have. I think what we are left with are like remnants of ideologies that were popular in the past, socialism and capitalism and liberalism and all of these different isms. And they kind of seem to have rapidly expired, and any kind of new resurgence of any of them just keeps expiring faster. So anything that's being brought back of any of these ideologies just seems to have an even shorter lifespan than they had when they first came about, and they already had a shorter lifespan than, let's say, dominant religions before that.
What do you mean? What specifically do you mean? Like, what's an instance of an ideology coming back that has a shorter lifespan of its previous instantiation?
Well, you had like a resurgence of a lot of left-wing politics right after World War II. For example, in Britain, you had Clement Attlee. You had a lot of you still had in the US as well, as far as I know, remaining high taxation, a lot of infrastructure investment by a big state on all of these things. And they just kind of, they haven't even been repealed or anything. They've just kind of decayed with time. They've just, with time, especially throughout the 70s, with the neoliberal reforms, people have sold off state assets, privatized them in the US and Britain, throughout the whole Western world. But it's kind of, mainland Europe tends to be a bit delayed with these processes. So it's happened more intensely in the US and Britain. But like these neoliberal kind of ideals, they didn't seem to have worked the way they were intended to either. They haven't really led to any kind of lasting accumulating wealth and affluence, other than for the pension funds of the boomers or something like that. So I'm just saying that like we do seem to need something new that's just not there yet. That's basically my philosophy in a way. That's like the political ideology that is needed is just doesn't seem to be around yet, and we still seem to lack the structure and the conditions for it to come about and emerge. And I think it becomes clearer and clearer that it's no longer a science of governance we're looking for, but it's actually an art. It's actually something that's not entirely prescriptive, that cannot be deduced from a manifesto or program. Doesn't mean that there's no science behind it, that you should just vibes do everything, but I think there's something lacking, and I think especially people our age and younger are really thrown into this vacuum and like forced to kind of scramble and find something, which I think leads to the other extreme of people clinging to like radical splinter ideologies, and it often is very unstable. A lot of these people then within a few years have jumped to some other radical splinter ideology.
Yes.
So it's unstable, and that's where I sympathize for sure with the whole post-liberal idea, and I think it's more an observation than really a prescription almost. I mean, for example, there are very valid critiques that the progressives have against like libertarians. I know there's this guy, Secular Talk, what's his name? Kyle Kulinski. Yeah, he kind of has some sympathies with Dave Smith, but he always kind of maintains that, like, though the libertarians are awful when it comes to economic policy, because their policies would just lead to people lacking healthcare and everything, and just becoming even more impoverished. And the thing is, in the current situation, maybe that's even true, because a lot of these ideologies are almost defined in a vacuum. Kind of, they're not really dealing with reality as much. It's like in physics where you assume the particles moving in a perfect vacuum with no other forces. That's kind of how their political theories are formulated. And I think that's just kind of they're kind of both right in a way, and it's hard to know how to reconcile them, because on the one hand, you do need some institutions that help people. You do need people that it is a net benefit in general if people have the infrastructure and the means to get educated, even though their parents weren't wealthy. But on the other hand, do you want the same institution to provide this to also have the monopoly on power and violence and a military and everything?
Sure. Yeah. Well, like you said, there's many different splinter ways you can. The consensus is that there's a problem.
Yeah.
Hence the post-liberalism. So what?
Yeah.
Let's do some theory crafting, Sean. What's your fourth political theory? What do we do? What do we replace it with?
Oh, geez, I don't know.
Me neither.
Well, I mean, okay, I was kind of hinting at the general direction. Ideally, but this is very utopian kind of speculation. Ideally, healthcare and infrastructure and these things would be provided by something that's neither private for-profit company, but also not necessarily the same institution that runs the military and has a monopoly on violence. There's something that can keep
parallel
the
structures.
State. Yeah, keep the state limited. I mean, it's common throughout our history. I mean, if you look at the Middle Ages, there was no such thing as the state. You had like the king, you had various nobility, lords and counts, and you had guilds, you had merchant guilds, you had craftsman guilds, you had You had different monastic orders, you had bishops, and it was very kind of chaotic and messy in a way. But it's pretty common throughout history. Even in like ancient Rome, they didn't have a written constitution that set in stone what it meant, how the Senate related to the consul and other things. Those were just kind of structures that were power centers, and they were like working in parallel. They were parallel structures, as you call it. And I mean, if you have a strong religious society and you have a church that doesn't have a military, they don't run their own police and army, but for example, they take care of all of the healthcare. If it was that way, that's a system that's not purely state-run healthcare and
Interesting.
also not privatized healthcare, right? It's a different
Yeah.
kind of system, and I feel like that's not something scientific. That's an art that requires creativity. That requires people to come up with new legal systems, new legal frameworks where kind of institutions can flourish that are set up in such a way.
Yeah. I think in the abstract, whatever the fourth political theory, whatever the new political theory is, whatever the post-liberal theory is, it has to have a highest value in its value hierarchy, to put it in Petersonian terms. Liberalism's highest value is freedom. Like I was saying, right? Freedom from all constraints, all of identity, all that. And I think we can't elevate freedom as the highest value. We have to elevate something like community or meaning or connection or something like that. And, admittedly, a lot of that's projection on my part in terms of, my sort of, at this point in my life, my focus is, finding community, surrounding myself with the people that I want to be, around. And, so I might focus on that more so than optimal. But this is a common problem. This is a common thing that many people are pointing out of the atomization and all that. And so I think in our age, it's not that we have not enough freedom. We have so much freedom. Go into VR, you have the freedom to do whatever. We have plenty of innovation. Our material wealth is higher than it's ever been. So the thing we lack is like connection and grounding. And so whatever the highest value is, it's something to that effect. That's the fourth political theory.
Yeah, I mean, you just said the highest value. If you're looking for the highest value, you kind of do get back to God, don't you?
True.
I mean, there's no way around it. If you're looking for like a highest value, that's like, that you can't possibly make it rigid and reduce it to something too tangible. It has to be something like God or love or whatever.
Yeah, well, as Jordan Peterson says, that's a great way to. We'll end it here. But also, that's literally how Jordan Peterson defines God as the highest value in the value hierarchy, and I think
Exactly.
there's merit to that. But anyway, all right. What you want to plug some stuff? Where can people find you?
Yeah, so I'm Deep Noetics on YouTube and Substack. I'm more active on Substack now, and I'm working on an essay on the Antichrist because that's kind of the big topic now.
Yeah,
So I'll definitely be going into the whole idea of this kind of unlimited liberalism, this Faustian pact that modernity has made with Lucifer for unlimited reason and unlimited wisdom. Yeah, so anyone interested in this kind of esoteric analysis of history, my Substack's full of that.
very cool. Thank you, Sean.